GED scholars, welcome to another video brought to you by GEDtalk. In this video, we will be reviewing the rubric for the Reasoning Through Language Arts exam. The rubric can help you better understand what is needed from you to score as many points possible on this section of the exam. Remember, this section is 45 minutes and requires you to type your response. If you are a slow typist, I suggest you practice. There are a lot of free typing websites out there. My favorite, though, is typingclub.com. It's free, and if you create an account, it tracks your progress for you. There's a link to the rubric in the description below. If you want to look at the rubric in Spanish, go to GED.com and in the search bar, type rubric. On the results page, there is a link to the rubric in Spanish. When you open the rubric, you'll notice it says 6 pages, but it's not. It's only 3 pages. So let me explain. The rubric itself, the 3 traits, are on the odd pages, pages 1, 3, and 5. The even pages have annotations or comments about those traits. So let's look at the first trait and then the annotations. Trait 1, creation of arguments and use of evidence. GED scholars, put on your detective hats because you need to be in a Sherlock Holmes mindset to 1, make this task a little fun if you're cringing at the thought of writing a response, and 2, because you need to act like a detective for this section. You will be presented with 2 passages on the same topic. They might be articles or letters to a newspaper, but the passages will have different arguments. On a side note, an argument is a reason or reasoning given for or against a matter under discussion. It doesn't mean yelling. One side could be for something and the other side against it. Your task for the extended writing section is to read both passages, choose the side with the stronger argument, and then write about how or why that side has a stronger argument. Let's look at these prompts from a retired GED exam. There's a link to this prompt in the description box below. This is the prompt that I normally give to my students who are studying for the extended writing response. I tell them to complete this prompt. This is untimed. But remember, you only have 45 minutes when it comes to test day to write this out. So notice that this prompt has 2 pages, and when you get to the second page, the actual prompt, the directions, are on page 2. And they read, the article presents arguments from both supporters and critics of daylight savings time who disagree about the practice's impact on energy consumption and safety. So they're kind of already giving you a heads up that you're about to read information, 2 different viewpoints when it comes to energy consumption and when it comes to safety. In your response, analyze both positions presented in the article to determine which one is best supported. Use relevant and specific evidence from the article to support your response. This is really important, you guys, and we're going to notice this when we start reviewing the rubric. Specific evidence from the article to support your response. This is called text-based evidence. So it's really important that you understand what does that mean. And we're going to talk about that in a moment as well. So like I said, you type your response and you are given 45 minutes to complete this. That 45 minutes includes not only writing, but it includes creating your outline and then saving a minimum of 5 minutes at the end to edit your response as well, because trait 3 brings up all of those elements that you want to edit for. Is it proper spelling? Are there punctuation marks used correctly? Things like that. So as I mentioned, this is one of the prompts I normally tell my students, start with this one. Keep it simple. Don't try to think too far outside of the box. You are basically going to read one side, the benefits of daylight savings time, and then you're going to read the second side, arguments against daylight savings time. And then you're going to decide which one shares information, which one has evidence that makes it a stronger side. And we'll look at that as well in this video. I'm also going to share the link to a second prompt that you can practice with. Once again, if this is your first prompt or your second prompt, do this untimed until you're comfortable. I normally give my students 11 total prompts, and numbers 1 through 3 are untimed. And after the third one, then I start telling them, now we're going to start timing you. Because no matter what, when it comes to test date, you will be timed unless you have accommodations, and then you'll be given the appropriate amount of time based on your accommodations. But here's the second prompt, same concept. You have the first side is on page 1, and then when you get to page 2, you have the second side. And you know that you have a second side because there's a header before the actual passage. And then on page 2, same concept. Here is your prompt that is telling you all of the information that we just covered in the other prompts as well. So back to trait 1. Like most other rubrics, you'll notice there are different scores and then the tasks you need to complete to get that many points. When it comes to rubrics, folks, always focus on the row where you can achieve the maximum number of points. If you're going to do something, do it well. And guess what? You're most likely never going to write another paper or essay again unless you're going to go to college or you have a job writing. So put in 100%. Put in all of your energy to achieve the maximum number of points when it comes to writing this response. Looking at trait 1 in the box worth 2 points, the first bullet point reads, generates text-based arguments and establishes a purpose that is connected to the prompt. That is a different way of saying what we read in the prompt on daylight savings times and the same information that you will read in every other prompt when it comes to writing this. They want you to use relevant and specific evidence from the source itself. So it's really important that you pay attention when you're reading to certain pieces of information that signal evidence. For example, in the daylight savings time prompt, when we come to the first page and we're reading this paragraph, number 4, that benefits argument's first paragraph, we can see that it says many studies have investigated the benefits and cost of DST. Research in the 1970s found that DST saved about 1% per day in energy costs. So what draws my attention to this piece of evidence is the fact that it says research. Research says that there's some type of scientific background involved from the 1970s. So it's kind of old research. But then it says that it found that DST saved about 1% per day in energy costs. So this is evidence. This is what I'm talking about, folks, when I say they want to see if you can identify the logic behind the argument being shared with you. So that would be a piece of evidence that I would want to highlight, because after I read the first passage, then I'm going to read the second. I need to sit there and think, hey, based on this evidence, and I'm highlighting it so my attention is drawn to it, which one is more powerful? Which one is stronger? So the first paragraph goes on to say, on average, most electricity used is for lighting and appliances. It makes sense that more sun at the end of the day meant less need for electricity. This follows right along with Ben Franklin's argument over 200 years ago. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight this last sentence too, because this is another piece of evidence. They're citing someone that they want to use as an authority figure. Benjamin Franklin was a founding father. He was not a president. He lived in the end of the 1700s, and that's why it says over 200 years ago. And so these are two pieces of evidence I found in this first paragraph about benefits. Now, that doesn't automatically mean like, oh, this is the side that has a stronger argument. You don't really need to read anything else. No, continue to read, because you might get to the second side arguments against DST, and you notice that they also did some type of research, a study in California, and it's indicating that DST had little or no effect on energy consumption that year. So this piece of evidence goes against what I just read up here about the 1970s research. A lot has changed since the 1970s, especially when it comes to appliances and how much energy we use in our homes. So as you're reading, make sure you're paying attention to evidence because like we see when it comes to the rubric, that's one of the first things that you are being graded on. And the other thing too, folks, is that you are not being graded by a human being. Your essay, your response will be graded by AI, artificial intelligence, by the computer. So you want to make sure that you are paying attention to what this computer is going to be looking for. Which leads to the second bullet point, and that reads, cites relevant and specific evidence from source text to support argument. This may include a few irrelevant pieces of evidence or unsupported claims. As mentioned earlier, this is saying that after you make the claim that side A is stronger than side B, you're able to use the words, phrases, ideas from the passage, the evidence we just found, to back up your claim. Direct the grader's or the computer's attention to the location of the evidence by saying which paragraph you found it in, and then mention why that piece of evidence matters. So going back to this first bullet point, the second part of it reads, establishes a purpose that is connected to the prompt. So they want to make sure that you understand what the task is. And establishes a purpose is you're needing to say in the beginning of your response, up front, within that first paragraph, within the first few sentences, you need to make a stance and say, this side is stronger than that side because, and then you give a short little summary of what you're going to write in your paper, and then your response unfolds. And we'll talk about how to structure that as well. You want to make sure, as I mentioned, yes, you're reading to find all of the different evidence. Make sure you're highlighting evidence. And then afterwards, you're going to compare that evidence. You're going to say, you know what? Arguments against DST had stronger evidence, had a better argument than the benefits of DST. And they want you to say that, like right up front, make that statement. You can't sit on the fence and say, oh, well, I'm going to fight for both sides. That is not the assignment. You need to choose a side and you need to choose it up front. Moving on to the second bullet point, cites relevant and specific evidence from source text to support argument, may include few irrelevant pieces of evidence or unsupported claims. As mentioned earlier, this is saying that you need to make that claim that, hey, side A is stronger than side B or vice versa. Use your words, use the phrases, use the ideas from passages to back up that claim. If you're going to say arguments against DST is stronger than the benefits of DST, it needs to follow with, and this is going to be in the paper you're writing in this essay, with because they cited a 2007 study in California that showed that there were no effects of energy consumption that year when they use daylight savings time. And you can bring up the other evidence that you might find within this. As we just scroll through, hope your eyes are just, looking at all of these numbers. Numbers are data. It's a great piece of evidence that you can use. So just be mindful of that's one of your tasks when you're reading, is to make sure that you're paying attention to that evidence, because you will be using the evidence to back up what you're saying. And that's one side is stronger than the other. Another thing too, when you are paying attention to the evidence that is being shared at the end, when you're deciding, which one is stronger, and you notice like, okay, well, arguments against DST, that's going to be the stronger side. And folks, this is not me saying this is the stronger side. So you could turn around and say, not only did they say this study and no effects, but this study goes against what the other side, the folks who are like their benefits, what they're claiming, because their study from over 50 years ago is saying that, hey, there's a 1% per day savings in energy costs. So obviously things have changed, as I had mentioned earlier, from the 1970s to the more current years. And so this is something that is another tool you can use, is you can take the evidence that is similar between the two passages and battle them out and say like, this one's stronger because of these reasons. And this gets us to the last bullet point, analyzes the issue and/or evaluates the validity of the argumentation within the source text. It distinguishes between supported and unsupported claims, makes reasonable inferences about underlying premises or assumptions, identifies fallacious reasoning, evaluates the credibility of sources, etc. Before moving forward, let's look at what some of those words mean. An inference is a conclusion. A premise is a statement made in an argument, and an assumption is an unstated claim. Fallacious means based on a mistaken belief or what lawyers call a flaw. So the premises are used to come to a conclusion. If the conclusion is not supported by the premises, then it's not valid. So back to the rubric. Hopefully, as you read with your detective hats on, you paid attention to the reasons or evidence that the side shares for being for or against something. What sort of evidence do they bring to the table? For example, if I'm reading something and it has to do with science, once again, I'm going to expect to see some type of article that cites scientists and scientific studies or research. I would scratch my head if the author cited his barber or his landscaper. When we look at the second prompt, this prompt has to do with taxation and revenue. It has to do with a U.S. representative. Right here we can see a summary of what you would read. It's something that was a press release from her office, and she's sharing why they should have a highway built and cut through this town that's right off the highway. Well, when you get to that second page, you have a letter to the editor from a small business owner who lives in that area and who is like, hey, there are reasons why I don't think that this highway should show up and mess up our town. So you would need to, once again, read both sides, and whenever you find evidence, you're going to highlight that evidence. And then once you're done reading both sides, you're going to say, okay, let me look at that evidence. Which side is stronger? And folks, might be agreeing with a side for this assignment that you wouldn't agree with in real life. And that's okay, because your goal is just to finish the assignment, which is read the two passages, which one has the stronger argument, and then write the paper. In a nutshell, trait 1 says, after reading the passages, choose the side you believe has the stronger argument and explain why, and use the evidence from the text. Sure, you can use a little bit of personal experience, but as the rubric says, you will score higher when you use the evidence from the passage itself. Completing this trait shows that you know how to analyze or think deeply about an argument. And the side with the stronger argument might be a side you don't personally agree with. But remember, you have a task, and that task is to complete the prompt. Read two passages and choose the stronger side, even if you don't agree with it. Now that we've read the information in the rubric, let's go down to page 2 and take a look at these notes that accompany this first trait. So when we get to page 2, letter A has to do with the title itself, trait 1. And you can read this on your own to have a better understanding of what the rubric is actually asking you. You will notice that it is repeating a lot of what I've already said, but as I mentioned, there's nothing wrong with reading this to have a better understanding of what it is they are looking for when it comes to this writing response. Also notice in letter C, as responses ascend the scale in this dimension, they will use evidence that is progressively more tied to the text. At lower score points, the student may rely more heavily on evidence drawn from personal experience with topic rather than from text-based evidence. That goes back to what they shared up here, that you can use a little bit of your own personal experiences. However, they would rather you use text-based evidence. And you already have that evidence because you should have been highlighting it as you were reading your text. Thanks for watching, GED scholars, and make sure you keep your head up. You've got this.